All right, welcome everybody. First order of business, as always, is turn off your cell phones, please, and wait after the talk. We'll have questions, but we would love to have them included in the recording of the presentation, so please wait for the microphone if you have questions after the talk. And then I'll just announce while I'm here to have, that everybody knows the next highlight seminar for the Andlinger Center will be here with Esther Takuchi from the University of Stony Brook, October 19th. So, with that, I have the distinct and very honorable pleasure to introduce my old friend and amazing colleague, Marcelo Mena, who's the Minister of the Environment of Chile. I never thought those words would come out of my mouth, but I'm very lucky to have known him through many of the amazing things that he's achieved in his career. He was a PhD student at the University of Iowa, where I initially met him under Professor Carmichael in the Center for Global and Regional Environmental Research. And then he did a postdoc at MIT's Joint Program for Science and Policy of Global Change. He was also a Fulbright visiting scholar at the University of California, Fresno, and has been named a distinguished alumnus of our alma mater, the University of Iowa, and the Universidad Católica de Valparaíso. And in his role now as the Minister of Environment, I would argue that perhaps he's the only minister in the world who actually does atmospheric modeling for his country to determine the air quality. And today we're going to be learning, though, more about his passion for renewable energy, which is something that I share, and his vision and the amazing path that Chile has ahead of them in terms of energy and the environment. So with that, I welcome my dear friend, Marcelo Mena. Please warmly give him applause.
Did you guys hear or no? Is it, I think it's on, or is it, maybe, let me see. It's on, yeah, but do you guys hear? Oh, good, no problem. Great. I thought you were going to tell a funny story, one of the embarrassing stories about biking across Iowa and stuff like that. Our passion for IPAs, which is also, so I wanted to give you a discussion on energy and the environment in Chile and the things that we're doing right now. I think it comes at a great time today because we need the type of leadership that we're finding in President Bachelet in terms of energy. I have this slide from my 2011 discussions when I was a visiting professor actually at Fresno State, in which what we thought then that we were going to double energy demand per decade because a lot of the energy intensity with the copper was actually driving a lot of energy demand, that we had high energy cost, $180 per megawatt hour, for example, and that really favored the status quo. Nobody wanted to invest because actually why would you want to invest if you're really selling your stuff super expensive? I always gave the example that, it would be like going to the store and buying a lot of apples, and then right just on the way to check out, you were going to get a couple of raspberries, and then they charged you everything like it was just raspberries, and so that made energy very uncompetitive. Large energy projects were causing a lot of social unrest and a lot of uncertainty for the investors, and that negative outlook actually got into the renewable energy projects. And the thing is, the establishment thought that we had to have huge projects of investments. And one of the big social movements that came out in 2011 was the Patagonia Without Dams movement. Actually, it was different environmental movements here. NRDC helped fund that, and the Tompkins Conservation Foundation, and Yvonne Chenard in Patagonia were all trying to stop us from building a dam in the Patagonia called Hidroicén. And we had large marches. The first march was almost 100,000 people. And then you started seeing that people hated hydropower, hated coal power, hated this Castilla project, which was 2,100 megawatt, super big coal-fired power plant that would by itself increase the carbon footprint of Chile by 20%. Alto Maipo is another hydro project that's running into some issues today due to the increased capital costs that they did not foresee. And the pollution was within our reach. We had renewable energies that were plentiful, but we had wrong policy decisions that were actually making barriers for this to occur. And so the projection was that that if we don't have more energy, we're going to increase energy costs. And all the establishment newspapers were saying, if we don't build these projects, it's going to be a terrible thing. Power from the coal sector started displacing hydro because there's little investment in hydro. For example, some of the titles from some of the economic newspapers was that without this big hydro project, Hidroisen, energy costs were going to rise by 4, right? So none of this really happened, and then finally the previous government approved that huge Castilla project that ended up being taken down by the courts because it was an illegal approval process. And of course, people started looking into nuclear and coal and LNG, and finally, for the first time, the energy sector started displacing the transportation sector as the highest emitting sector in the country. And again, the former president said that we have to have this large hydro in the Patagonia, we have to have transmission lines, and that's what happened until in 2014 we designed an energy policy. Some of the guys say, no, this would happen anyway, capital cost of the renewable energy was gonna make this happen anyway, but that's not true. First off, the first thing that we did was said, the Hidroisen project was actually within the Ministry of the Environment. I was only vice minister then. That's my former boss. And all these guys decided to, pull the plug on the Hidroisen project. I was actually the guy that was probably enjoying myself more than the rest in the room, because I actually have a tattooed thing to remind myself that I had to reject Hidroisen. And anyway, the Lorax little thing I have. Anyway, so that really shifted. But what happened is that we're saying the same thing. It's a false dilemma. Without Hidroisen, we're going to have higher cost of energy, uncertainty. The government's doing a really bad job. They're against investment. That's all they said. And we started an energy revolution that started the moment we shut the door on polluting projects, and in which we saw energy and the environment working together. One of my closest friends in the cabinet is the Minister of Energy. And when President Bachelet called me to become the vice minister then, 4 years ago, she said that I want you to work hand in hand with the energy sector. And so what we reformed was by design. And so the Ministry of Energy laid out the roadmap and leveled the playing field for energy. And we set a goal of 70% renewable energy by 2050, and 90% by, it's probably going to be 90% now, with looking at the new numbers. And this process was really important because in 2011, when Hidroisen was approved, Piñera called together a group of experts, the same of incumbents, and they said, we wouldn't have even 30 megawatts of solar by 2030. That's what they said. We have a lot more than that today. And anyway, so if you ask the same people, obviously they're going to say, we're doing fine. Let's just do large hydro. Let's do coal. We shouldn't change the things that are doing. But we did, and the Minister of Energy bought this in from our climate target process, which was all with public participation, in which we had experts, NGOs, industry leaders, the government worked together and looking at the numbers. How much we project the coal cost, the capital cost for renewable energy, et cetera. And we put all this in one number, and we came out with what we could achieve and how much it would cost. And the Ministry of Energy followed the same lead. And so we had a validated energy agenda in which all the players were supporting this agenda. And again, they continue. We unbundled the energy auctions. But again, some of the incumbents were always saying, this energy auction changes that you're doing is going to be increased energy costs because it's too much uncertainty for the players, et cetera. And what we did also, the Ministry of the Environment, we introduced the polluter pays principle, a coal, carbon and pollution tax, in which coal pays most of the tax, and LNG and diesel. And it's actually for large industrial 50 megawatt turbines and boilers. And it has another thing on pollutants based on population density. So it's a very powerful land use signal. So we charge more for if you emit particulate matter at a more densely populated location. If it's in non-attainment of pollution, there's a plus on the tax. Therefore, for the first time, we have economic incentives to reach attainment. If you reach attainment, you pay less tax. That's great. Like I have industry guys saying, "Hey, when are you going to declare that we're not in non-attainment anymore? Because I don't want to pay more of that tax." Another thing important is that the local tax is so expensive. Sometimes $30,000 per ton of particulate matter, which is actually almost 10 times more than the marginal cost of abatement, and therefore we see in every single facility that they're over-complying by far. So the industry standard that they said was impossible to meet, they meet with a lot of easiness. So we had also an emission standard that we introduced, that the costs were half of the social benefits, and that's something that we did, and I was part of that process for the studies in which we showed that the increased capital cost could not be transferred to the energy cost, and therefore it was something that just the power guys were just going to have to be able to pay and not really affect energy prices. And so the change was substantial, even though I still see that there's a lack of trust in what I'm about to say, that the power sector cleaned itself up substantially. We didn't have, like the US, grandfathering of old power plants. We gave them 3 years to clean up. And so this image that I did see, and I put this image because the guy that operated this would tell me that when the guys that we would come to enforce them, I wasn't working in the government, they would shut off all the controls. They had them installed. That's terrible. Why would you already have the investment done? You didn't want to have the operational costs of 1% that you would lose of the production because you had to operate the baghouse filters. And so this image to me, just bothered me so much. And I went to visit the facility this last summer in Chile in February, and the power plant is on. I actually have some thermographic images showing the plume, but it's much cleaner than expected. So they're over complying, and the tax and emission standard had this very deep impact on making the energy sector much cleaner. Another thing that we did, and which is one of my main passions, is the air pollution issue. I think it's by far today, and the UN Environment says, it's the most important today environmental health issue globally, right? There's millions of people that die every year due to air pollution. If you were to eat pollution, you have a digestive system that will be able to not have the impact. But if you want to make some damage to somebody, the lungs are very vulnerable to respiratory disease due to the pollution. We're very bad at getting the stuff out, and it's related to multiple risks, cancer, respiratory disease, etc. And the thing is, we were dragging our feet on the pollution attainment. We had a standard that was in place 2012 that I worked on, but the previous government didn't have the political will to implement directly. And so this really goes to show you how big the effort is. I mean, we've done more pollution attainment programs in this 4 years than the whole institutionality of Chile since 1996. So, and this has really been good. The Mercurio, which is a newspaper that always tries to criticize us, went out and looked at what happened with the health effects of where we had taken measures. I had sort of intuition that we're doing well, but these guys, they came out with not the title they wanted. The cities with pollution controls have half the respiratory disease impact. So we have gone together, and it's around 60% reduction in some cities like Santiago. It's not just the air pollution. It's also probably our smoking, non-smoking, different regulations, etc. But altogether, Chileans are breathing much easier today. Another thing that we've been working on, obviously, the climate policy. And I love what President Bachelet said when she signed the Paris Agreement. In front of a huge facility for solar PV of 350,000 panels, 110 megawatts, that's supplying energy at much cheaper rates than we were paying for before. And she said, the Paris Agreement puts an expiration date on fossil fuels. We told the world that we won't burn all the coal, oil, or gas because it would be incompatible for a safe climate future for our children. And I have another picture of us in 2013 in front of 10 panels. we're saying that renewable energy is going to be the future, and she did this for her government headquarters. So this is something, again, by design. So I like these pictures and showing you how explosive this whole thing is. November 2nd, we're going to inaugurate the largest solar PV facility in Latin America with 250 megawatts, with 1 million panels, 400-hectare facility that's already operating, but we just haven't gotten around to inaugurate. Another thing that we did, the Kigali Agreement, the Montreal Protocol was an excellent agreement that allowed us to have lower rates of skin cancer and different eye disease. But we recently, there's something that the US led and Canada led, which is an amendment to the Montreal Protocol that actually is to change out the CFCs. We changed them out to HFCs, right? But those cause climate change, and now we're going to get out and do transcritical CO2, hydrocarbon-based refrigerants. It's going to be another massive shift, and that's going to help us reach the climate agreements, because it's going to be able to, if we do everything all right, it will be 0.6 degrees cooler with the Kigali Agreement. We're the first country in the Americas to sign this. Another thing that's the political will of President Bachelet is that we're facing climate denial, right? We're facing climate denial in the face of climate extreme events. And when we heard all the climate denial about the same day we signed the Paris Agreement, we heard that the U.S. was going to get out of the Paris Agreement, and we started seeing all the Chinese hoax and all these comments. Well, President Bachelet said, June 1st, she said, I will teach climate science in every schoolroom from grade school to high school starting now. And that was a great announcement, and we went to this school that's based on ecological or environmental education, in which they have, of course, a green roof, and it's in the middle of a very socially, sensitive location. And so we are going to use climate change to teach science overall, but it has a lot more relevance when you could see it into the geosciences, et cetera. I don't know what I did there. There we go. And another thing that is very important because to us is that while you see some government leaders wanting to disaffect national parks and allow oil extraction, coal extraction, we worked with the Tompkins Conservation Foundation. Douglas Tompkins was the former owner of North Face, and his wife, Chris Tompkins, which was one of the first CEOs of Patagonia. And we worked together and to generate 8 national parks. It's a 9 million hectare project that I have the profound pleasure to be able to be a part of, because I was a very big fan of Douglas Tompkins, who passed away during the COP21. And so it's great to fulfill his vision of conservation. It's 9 million hectares is 900 million tons of CO2 that's going to be captured forever. We're going to keep it, and it's going to be able to provide great ecosystem services. Another thing that we're doing that's pretty big is ocean conservation. In the international climate dialogue, it's seen that ocean conservation is good climate action, both on mitigation and adaptation. There's processes of CO2 capture that we need to maintain. Otherwise, we'll offset the carbon balance again. And when you have healthier marine ecosystems, you're more resilient to extreme weather events. And so this effort has been substantial, multiplying by 10 the marine protected areas in Chile, including marine protected areas in Rapa Nui, with indigenous consultation, with voting, because we believe in public participation for policy. We need to do policy with the people, and they voted that they want to protect the 720,000 kilometers squared marine protected area with only fishing capabilities that will be ancestral or traditional in nature. So I think it's a really great thing to do. We're also doing one in Cape Horn, and there are going to be many documentaries on Nat Geo about these ecosystems that are very pristine that we think need to be protected. And so thus Chile becomes the number one continental country in terms of ocean conservation in the world. Now, another thing that I think is crucial for the future is to incorporate the price of carbon on our economy, as you saw. And even though our tax is modest, of $5 per ton, it is a market signal that's very important. And to me, the picture of the COP21, I wasn't there. I was vice minister, so I was looking, I didn't get to ride around with the president then. And but this picture they sent me, and I was so pumped to see Hollande and Merkel and Peña Nieto and Trudeau and the OECD head Angel Gurria and the president of Ethiopia all working together and calling to increase the price of carbon on our economies. And when I debuted as a minister, President Bachelet was very happy to see that we hosted a carbon price lunch with industry leaders in which our main allies are the power sector, who believes in clean energy now, the mining sector, who believes that they need to have lower emissions of carbon to have more competitive products, the retail sector, and Paul Pullman, who's the CEO of Unilever, who's really a great climate and sustainable development leader. And so this is something that's a shift. We have pretty much all the GDP in Chile supporting our climate action, and which is great. And so we are part of a select group of different countries, and we, within the Pacific Alliance, which I always forget to say is Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, we are mandated by our leaders recently, in the recent meeting, our presidents, to generate the first Latin American carbon market for offsetting emissions, which we want to couple to the California and the Canadian markets, therefore have the largest carbon market that could be able to collaborate and exchange emissions with the huge China market that's going to be created and the emissions trading scheme that the European Union has already established. So we created conditions for cheaper, cleaner energy, and that's something that's done by design. And paradoxically, it was a left-wing social democrat government that did the market-based solutions that we required to have unleash these forces. And so the overall, first up, going back to, we had enabling environments for clean energy. We don't have outside investment for climate action, but actually internally funded, profit-driven, and so we have the emission standard that increased capital costs for coal. We set another signal with the green tax. We unbundled energy auctions. And 2013, in the last year of Piñera's government, we had no renewable energy, $130 per megawatt hour, and we didn't even offer all the blocks, and some were left deserted because we didn't have any offers. We didn't have energy to offer. First time around, we do 2014, the first energy auction, and it was 30% renewable energy. And the establishment is like, you guys were lucky. It's not going to happen again. Then they did 100% renewable energy block, and daytime solar, and it got 100% renewable energy. And then the guys were like, well, the empire's going to strike back. We're gonna have the old existing coal going to kill out all new solar for the next energy auctions, and they got killed again. And actually, I need to update this number. It's 80%, but the Minister of Energy was saying it's 80%. So the price almost a year ago, we had the Bloomberg said that it's actually the lowest energy auction. It lasted for a couple of weeks. The cheapest energy ever offered at any energy auction in the world, at half of the price of coal. And you can see that we'll generate this new energy auction will cost $3 billion in investment. It'll be 2,500 megawatts more of renewable energy. It'll allow us to meet and exceed our standard of 20% solar and wind. And it's the cheapest solar energy in the world at 68% less emissions than we had when we had no competition. And so this renewable energy sector has caused, for example, the solar market to increase by 6. When we're done with this, we already exceeded the IREICEN project that everybody thought was so amazing, and it wouldn't even be built yet because it's a super complicated engineering project that was really bad design. And we have this renewable energy growth. So this is the guy from AES. I actually met him recently. I told him I used a picture. I recognized him. I hadn't seen him before in person. And he said, this carbon tax, maybe it's not that big anymore, but we're not there to really do more coal-fired power plants. So we killed coal, not by mandate, but by market, because we used a level playing field. So they know that we built this little catapult that's sending little pebbles to the the coal industry, right? Little pebbles. But they know that they could, the catapult could still throw pretty big rocks. Like it's the same catapult, it's the same structure, it's the same way of reporting emissions. And it could really get and cut deeper into existing coal pretty fast. Since this slide, Enel has said they're not going to have any more, they're going to shut down their coal-fired power plants by 2035. NG said, is probably going to get rid of their coal assets. If they're messed up, they won't fix them. And for example, Colbún had a permit in hand for coal, a new power plant, and they decided they're not going to build it because it doesn't make any sense anymore. So Al Gore has also been looking at this, and if you guys look at the new inconvenient sequel, there's a big portion of Chile's climate action recently, and this is very important for us because we have a very hard time to communicate this internally because these good stories aren't really covered by the press in Chile. I don't like to sound like Trump in terms of comparing about the fake media and that kind of stuff, but sometimes it does happen that you don't get your stories being told. And so there's a little exchange between Al Gore and my president recently. There's another thing that I think is really exciting, and I think it's going to be really fun for the future, which is we've got the conditions for unleashing even more renewable energy. We have more renewable energy than we'll ever be able to use. We have 3,000 coal-fired power plant equivalent solar PV that we'll be able to use, but we're not going to ever use. So we need to do two things. We're integrating regionally with Argentina and Peru to be able to export our excess renewable energy. And we're looking into the solar mining initiative, which is something that our Economic Development Bank, Corfo, is looking into, which is, first off, we're designing panels for the Chilean sun because we have too much UV B, and so it's really causing these to not work, and they die faster than expected. Second off, we're able to look into the hydrogen economy for the copper industry. And we have an increased energy demand, increased copper demand because of the electromobility agenda. So therefore, what I told former ministers of finance is coming true faster than we thought. We thought the renewable energy was going to drive energy costs down, and it happened. We thought that we were going to integrate regionally, and it's happening much faster than we expected. And we thought that the climate economy would drive copper demand, and this copper, when you start getting into electronic items, the life cycle analysis shows that when you have really clean energy for the use of electric car, the manufacturing emissions are going to be more important, and therefore we need to have low emissions copper for this to be attractive internationally. So I think this is something that's really exciting because we already have auctions, for lithium-ion battery manufacturing. We're looking, and we have some investors that want to come in and have EV manufacturing altogether. So we have all the ingredients for the solutions for the climate economy, and that's really going to be very fun. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions you guys might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo, very much. I'd like to point out he's wearing a bicycle tie for those of you in the room that can't see. So I appreciate that. He also was the first recipient of a bicycle blender from myself. For those of you who have never seen the bicycle blender, the minister himself can, in fact, do this as well. So yes. Thank you. Do you still have your bicycle blender?
I got two. Fantastic. I actually lend mine out to guys so they could use it more than me because the story gets a little bit old with me doing the same thing all the time.
Fantastic. So, I mean, that being said, to bring that back to the broader issues at hand, demonstrating alternative ways to do things is something that Marcelo is amazing at, and I'm so glad that he's here to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Julio. I'm a graduate student in environmental engineering here from Mexico, and I mean, this is all very impressive, and also finally, great to see someone with the right qualifications leading this type of minister positions. I was wondering, one of the problems that we see sometimes in Mexico and other countries, at least, is the interest groups that are lobbying against these type of initiatives, even though, they make sense and they provide this health benefit. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the opposition that you have when you were trying to have these initiatives, and maybe how you structured the plans that you were trying to push forward to prevent the opposition from growing too strongly from this interest group.
I think the secret is putting them on the table, sitting them with you and having a discussion. When we decided our NDCs, which could have been more ambitious, but that's what we came up with, is that we had them on the table, we looked at the numbers, it's like, okay, we're good with $1 per watt by 2020. Okay, we're all good. Okay, no problem. Our energy growth is going to be this much. Are we all good? Yeah, okay. Then we put it all in a blender, and this is what comes out. And they have to recognize that because they were the part of the process. The power sector before, they did, after the 3-year process, they said they did a parallel study they took in 2 weeks and said it was way more expensive than what we had said, even though they were sitting with us the whole time around, and so it was very dishonest of them. But we called them out super fast, and so they just sat down, and now they're with us. And actually, the most exciting thing I think today is, and you always have to think of having allies and who's going to be able to help you out. And today, the transportation sector hasn't really big interest groups, okay? Like they're sort of weakened by the diesel emission scandal. They want to go to EVs and stuff, and so they aren't really at a position to really negotiate harsh. And so therefore, because, for example, like we have a emissions car tax for new cars in Chile. We've shifted the way, I forgot that slide, the emissions of the cars that are being sold are much cleaner because of this emissions tax. But the thing is, if they want to play hardball, I could go into the vehicular emission fraud thing and say that they had tax fraud, and then that's probably not the way they want to go. Anyway. And so the electrical sector wants to get into the electrical vehicle market. They want to sell more energy, right? They want to do the heating. They want to sell more energy to offset the coal the diesel and the gasoline. And so they're our allies. So my suggestion is, first of all, set them on the table, and second of all, get their enemies on your side. And then that's why, because otherwise you're not going to be able to really negotiate and make any progress.
Hello, my name's Anurag. Thank you for that really good talk. Just sort of building off that question, one of the ways that this debate often gets framed in developing countries is economic growth or growth in the traditional sense versus the environment, right? So just how do you think, one, how did you tackle that when that debate came up, and if it came up? And secondly, what is the short-term and long-term impact of this change on macroeconomic indicators, GDP growth, employment, et cetera?
Okay, so, well, first off, our discussion for NDC was, we tried to be very technical. I was part of the consulting group before I became vice minister then, and so therefore we tried build a lot of evidence, but we ended up having some guys saying, I don't believe your model, like the former Minister of Finance, and that's the end of it. And so it ended up being more of a political discussion, and it is, in the end, always a political discussion. So, we just got that off the table, and we decided, based on the president decided, this is our goal. And so the projection is, and they didn't believe it initially, is that our NDC, our nationally determined contribution, our commitment to the climate agreement, it actually created more growth and created more jobs than non-acting on climate. There's a very simple reason. We don't have any fossil fuels. So the less we use, it's better for us, right? And so that was reaffirmed by the climate sectors, the energy sectors, the energy ministry's mitigation policy that showed actually our numbers are actually even conservative, so we're actually going to grow even more, and the G20's report by the OECD, Climate, Invest in the Future, which shows, again, like Stern's New Climate Economy studies, that more growth is going to occur. And actually, it's better because if you don't tackle climate change, you're going to have GDP loss, as we've seen in the Caribbean islands, where Fiji, for example, was talking to the Prime Minister recently, they said they lost 30% of their GDP on one storm, right? So these are huge numbers. Chile has lost around 0.6% of GDP in 2015 due to the flooding, and we haven't even finished 2017 to estimate what we lost with the 700,000 hectares of the biggest forest fire we had in the world this decade. So the thing is, we have to have balance both sides. The OECD provides really great information on this. That really it's a crossroad. Choose climate action, grow more. Ignore climate, grow less. And so with that clarity, obviously, we chose the side of climate action.
Question in the middle here.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. My name's Matthew Cleary. I'm a visitor here from taking sabbatical leave from the University of Sydney in Australia. I've got a question regarding, you've got these incentives in place to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Amongst those incentives, is there something to ensure continuity of electrical supply, for example, so that when the sun is not shining, that they are able to provide backup and that those costs are factored in, and the carbon emissions too are factored into that?
Yeah, true, and it is important that we have backup and stability of the grid. We have invested in having a better grid that's, with transmission and integration of the grid. And the true thing that happened recently with the super cheap solar that we had is that it cannibalized more base load solar, right? So we have a pump storage facility that didn't, pump storage solar, it's called Valhalla Energy, really awesome project, you should look it up, that has the capability to provide baseload solar, pumping up into a lagoon, and nighttime it's hydro. It's in the north of Chile. It's not built yet, but it's supposed to sell energy at $50 per megawatt hour. And so the thing is, we decided in our new energy auctions that are going to start in October that grid stability or backup power has some recognition, but not enough just to kill just go to coal again, right? And so it will recognize the flexibility of the grid type of energy, but I haven't gotten into details because I'm still Ministry of the Environment. But it will have the incentives that are enough. So we'll have base load and stability, et cetera. But right now the backup is actually, paradoxically, it's super messed up because I never thought this would happen. They use coal-fired power plants and they turn them on and off with the sun, right? So like the guys are hating it because they have to ramp up the power and then the sun comes up and they have to turn it off. And so we're doing that with natural gas also, and we have substantial hydro to be able to provide that backup power.
I was wondering if maybe you could expand. Oh, go ahead.
My name is Kubat Ibadoglu. I'm a member of the International Board of Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. I'm here as a visitor of economics at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Mr. Minister, for your insightful presentation. And now Chile has very impressive indicators in the Research Governance Index. And according to the latest publication, Chile was ranking the second place, first place Norway, first place UK, and Chile has also a copper industry. My question is that why Chile out of the extractive industry transparency initiative? Why Chile is not going to benefit from these global efforts? And second question is related to the investor behavior. For me, very interesting. What's the behavior of the investors, local and the international investors in Chile? They still is going to invest money to the tradition industry, I mean the mining industry, like the copper, or there is increasing the interest to invest money for the future, for the clean and cheaper renewable energy. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thank you. We just haven't, I don't know, it's not my sector, but if you tell me more information on that initiative, I'm sure we'll be interested to join such an initiative. We're doing mission innovation with in a solar initiative with the Indian government, and President Basha is going to sign, support of more R&D for the solar industry, and the investors overall, they want a good investment. And the thing I think the solar initiatives did was that people were willing to make less of a profit, but it'd be more stable. So that's why we have some people and substantial investments from pension funds, from the world that are looking into these investments, which are as sure as the sun will come out, right? Of course, so we have very substantial investments coming out from Canadian funds and whatever, retirement funds from the police in the US, and it's really good. Now, what I do think that we need to do, sorry to go a little bit off topic here, is that we have fully privatized pension funds in Chile. Every single dime that I've earned is privatized. But the moment that we had those awesome prices, our pension funds went down because we're invested in the conventional energy. So I think the future is that we need to have divestment initiatives in terms of carbon disclosure projects in terms of our emissions in our pension funds and whether they are compatible with the climate agreements. It doesn't make any sense that we are invested in these things that will not be burned. You know, it doesn't make any sense to be exploring coal if we're not going to burn it all, right? So therefore, I think that's something that we'll be able to unleash a lot of investment once we are able to look into that. The investors are in Chile. You know, we provide a good environment to invest, even though we've had some judicial issues on some of the approval of some projects. Overall, what we do tends to stick, and so we have a really good environment to make these investments possible.
Fascinating talk. Rob Sokolow, School of Engineering. My question is, what do you need from us? And the question then is, who's us? And I want to exclude the whole political story. Universities, research, analysis, training. You've got so much under your own control now. But sometimes you must say, gee, I wish I had some help with this. And I wonder what this is. If there's anything left, because it's a terrific story. The INC is working. It stimulated tremendous initiative in each country, which was the idea. But where do we have anything to offer anymore?
I think the biggest challenge for all developing countries overall, in terms of their nationally determined contributions or the climate agreement, or going to zero emissions by the century, is I think you know, the capability for other countries to have the same capacity to provide the evidence for their Minister of Finance saying this is the right way. I mean, that's one initial way, and we have a lot of funding, and there's like a 2050 Pathway initiative that has external funding to be able to provide the evidence to say this makes sense. But the thing is, while the electrical sector will be inevitably clean worldwide, you know, it will be that way unless you have, you know, interest groups bombarding these things. But as long as we have an honest discussion on economics, it will win. Transportation is not. And so transportation and heating is not necessarily locked in to become clean. And therefore, I think the transportation lessons that we need to learn are substantial in terms of land use planning, integrating waste management, transportation overall, and how we're able to really reduce the emissions substantially. That means, you know, more local economy, local agriculture. It means a whole bunch of things, and I think that's where everybody has a big challenge. Because it doesn't make any sense. And the EV system, I mean, like EV, that's why I still stick to the bike, is that, you know, when you're pushing your pedal on an EV, you see 100 kilowatts power when you're accelerating. And then you start thinking, that's like I don't know, it's like 1,000 meters squared of solar panels just to accelerate one car. And so overall, we need to be looking all together into being way more efficient in the ways that we do these things. I mean, like I heard the other day, sustainable shrimp is possible. Sustainable all-you-can-eat shrimp is not possible. And the same goes with every single aspect. We need to be way more efficient, and we can't follow this model of waste everywhere. You know, and that's pretty much. I think that's where the big challenges lie. We can make things clean, but it's not going to be really sustainable if we're not efficient and we use less.
Terrific answer.
Hi, my name's Jason. I'm a senior mechanical engineering student here at Princeton. A little bit ago in your presentation, you were talking about how solar is going to exceed demand in your country. Are you looking into any energy storage systems other than stored hydro, particularly battery farms, to combat that?
Yeah, true. Well, I think, and Steve Chu, when he visited us, former Secretary of Energy, he really gave a great idea, I think. In terms of like, for example, everybody's going like, oh, let's go EV, electrical stuff, et cetera. The density is an issue, right? And so I think solar fuels, synthesized solar fuels that have high energy densities that can be shipped. And so this sounds like science fiction, but I don't think it's that bad. You know, with a 10% efficiency for a synthesis of a CO2 turned into methanol, and you can ship it out in something that's not dangerous, and you could actually use in every single internal combustion engine that you have, that could really dig deep into the emissions of sectors that we really haven't dug deep into, which is the transportation sector. And that's what I think, in essence, is going to be one of the ways to do it. Having chemical storage that's safe, and you can really move stuff around.
We have another question over here.
Yeah, I'm Vinod Gupta from Physics Department here. First of all, congratulations for this wonderful talk and sharing a success story, which should be a huge incentive for the rest of the world. Looking at your cover story, I was looking at the pictures, and I was hoping that the windmill is going to be a big part of your energy profile. But your talks is entirely focused on solar. Mm-hmm. So how much is the wind part of?
Half of the renewable energy. So though it's still substantial, we have a lot. And I think once we have a big coast, of course, and so if we start seeing the costs that are being driven down of the offshore wind, as we've seen in England. I was listening, last week we were at the Canada's Climate Summit with EU and China, and we saw, and it was very exciting, right? First off, because we have a lot of people across that room of all ministers that we're seeing, you know, these things occur today, and how in 2 years, offshore wind has been driven down up to $60 per megawatt hour, which is pretty competitive. This has a load factor, a power capacity of 60%, which is actually closer to base load than we would imagine. So we could have huge wind power that's going to be, and since we have a big coast, everywhere that you have a direct connection to the coast, you have huge wind. So therefore, we've actually have grown faster with the wind. And we have to have a good framework, because we have to look into the noise issue, and we're looking into, we have an emission standard for noise, for point sources, but we're going to go specifically on wind, because obviously we don't want the kickback, the pushback from the communities once we start getting, like, digging deep into this stuff, right? I mean, because it is a little bit, you know, when you're in a desert and you see this 400 hectares of panels, I mean, you start thinking, well, man, I don't know if it's going to be good to put this everywhere, right? And so we have to have a good framework for the future for all those other technologies too. So this whole story goes with the fact that every single project you saw or described undergoes a really serious environmental impact assessment process with public participation, with indigenous community be part of the profits, and that's how you make it work. Otherwise, it's just going to get a lot of pushback, as the coal industry got a while ago.
Hi, my name is Raimundo. I'm from Chile. Thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask, maybe this is very specific to Chile, about the environmental assessment system that is in place in Chile. And my understanding is it's a very demand-driven system. Basically, I want to do a project, let's say call it energy, and then I have to submit it to the bureaucracy, and if it doesn't fail the test, it can be done. So there's, in comparison to a top-down vision of what should be built as a national strategy of the country, and that seems to be a problem with, for example, Hydro-Send, exactly, etc., etc. So my question is, first of all, whether that is true, and if there are any challenges to the specific way that the minister is dealing with assessing the environmental impacts of individual projects. If there's a vision of change,
Yeah, so for example, there's a tool that came into the new regulations, which is called the Strategic Environmental Assessment, which allows policies to be analyzed in a more holistic way. And so, for example, with the transmission line law that we recently enacted, we have a decision where we want the lands to be distributed with having a lower ecological impact, distributions for these lines, because these are huge, of course, and they go through ecosystems that are very sensitive. And Cardones Polpaico, which is a huge line that we're doing now, is actually very sensitive to that too. So our reform that we presented to President Bachelet is a big project that says that we should have initial a relationship between the projects and the people, so the people have a real capacity to incide in changing the design of the project and make it less impactful. Secondly, having better ways of sharing cost and sharing the wealth of, and finally, having strategic projects be evaluated as they are. For example, if Chile needs a really great transmission line and it's very crucial, and everybody knows it's like that, we have to have a special process in which we have predetermined stages in which we could really look into the projects and modify them and make them better, instead of going all or nothing type of analysis in which we go through a large project that we don't like in the end, and all that is for nothing, in the sense that we have all the internal designs that are very inflexible, hard-coded, and then we can't really modify to have it go to a place that we could approve it. So that's the type of reforms that are needed for that. So the better, more land use planning is the better option. The right wing or the industrial people didn't want us to do land use planning at the beginning, having zonification where we want coal-fired, ports. I think the real recognition today is that we need land use planning, and that's why we're about to have the first land use policy for Chile going to be published by the end of the year.
Hello, I'm Cesar. I'm working in the Chemical and Biological Engineering department here. I wanted to know if there is any good feedback with other countries in Latin America. I mean, is Chile influencing other countries in terms of these projects, or is getting any influence from other countries in Latin America for this project? That will be my first question. And the second one, is the government of Chile investing in the development of biotechnological companies, for example?
Yeah, for many years we decided that we don't want to be picking winners sometimes, in the sense that that's like the free market type of way, that we should let the market just do its job. But it ended up, as I was telling Rob, that just a lot of apps, just a lot of apps, no real change, and that's not really a real true industrial development. So we need to be looking into our competitive advantages, and we will choose those. There are some investments in biotech, but I'm not really specialized in that. I think there were a lot of investments for a moment. I think the near-term investments are going to be look into R&D of energy systems, cleaner mining, etc. All new projects of mining have thicker mine tailings, and the cool thing is that since we have a mine closure law, they have to look at the liability for the full life cycle of the mine. So therefore, those are so expensive that they're really choosing to very, very tight mine tailings, very very little water reuse, desalinated water, 40% renewable at least. They're not sucking the water out of their neighbors in the deserts, but actually providing water from desalination. Instead of cutting down trees, they compensate with a sanctuary for or national park. It's a new way. It's absolutely out of necessity though, right? Because they need to have more acceptance. And I think the initial part of your question was, I forgot. So and we, for example, I think this inspiration thing. For example, when we announced the plastic bag ban 2 days ago. First, big country that wants to ban plastic bags in coastal cities. We got to get rid of the plastic. It's terrible for the ecosystems, etc. I'm sure, couple months from now, we're going to have our neighbors doing the same thing. With energy, same thing. Unbundling the carbon tax. Colombia has a carbon tax now. And Canada had a carbon tax, and it's the same price that we set, $5 per ton. So there's good peer pressure, right? And one of the good, that's why I showed you the picture of the carbon pricing leadership panel, the initial one, is that those guys have their Sherpas, which is us, and we talk and we influence each other, and we sort of want to be in the ambition. So what do you think if we do this regional carbon market? Hey, why don't we integrate with California? And having these high-level discussions that wouldn't occur any other way. So that's really these platforms that are really great. And if you've got the World Bank on board, right? It's not like it's Greenpeace, right? It's the World Bank, and so it really it allows you to have a safety in the sense that you are not really against the mainstream, but this is the new mainstream.
Hi, I'm Josh. I'm a student from Wilson School, and thank you for this speech. I have a question about, are the solar panels or wind turbines mostly imported or domestic manufactured? Because if they're imported, is there a concern about the trade deficit caused by such importing? And is there a strategic plan from the government to develop a domestic manufacturing?
Yes. So we started with the auxiliary industry that's been developed in Chile. All the tracking systems are actually built in locally. The panels themselves, we're looking at the incentives to have panels for the Chilean sun that's not the European sun, that will have actually more efficiency for our own sun. So I think that's going to work out well. We don't care too much about the trade deficits. We're an open market economy. We think it's really important that we don't have any barriers. We supported TPP. We thought it was a good thing to do, to have more trade, et cetera. And in terms, I just want to say that what China has been doing, has been like the representative Xie. He's been, you look at the language, the ambition. It's just really amazing, and it's based out of also the same vision: climate action, healthier cities, cleaner air. And I really I think it's really great. And today, since there's a vacuum of leadership on climate action in some locations, I think China, European Union, Canada, and France and Germany are going to be really crucial to continue the drive for more ambition on climate action. December 12th, when the COP21 has 2-year anniversary, Macron is going to have a big climate summit with leaders. And so that really is great to see all these guys showing that this wasn't a promise, that actually countries are benefiting and having more investment due to the climate action they have committed.
One more question. No, go ahead. We'll have one final question and then.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you for your talk, Minister. It was very interesting and great and very motivating to see such a positive talk. My name is Stefan Scholt and I'm from Germany. I'm here as a visiting student. My question is about the carbon tax. You said it's at $5 per ton. There are many studies indicating that this is way too low for actually working well. What is and more like $30 per ton would be good. What is your plan forward in this topic?
But it already worked well. That's the thing. That's sometimes you get sort of stuck into these things. It should be higher, 50. It is all relative to how your economy is structured and how the energy blend is. So $5 per ton, which is in virtually really almost 10 with the local pollution aspect, really shifts between coal and natural gas. That's already a 50% reduction of emissions at least, or 40% reduction. So that's already big, and so it's a market signal. Very important. The private sector moves a lot with signals. As I said, it's a little catapult. It's got little pebbles, but they know that they can switch out to big boulders pretty fast, and that's by just one act of Congress. So therefore, they're like, I'm not sure about this carbon tax. I'm not sure about this coal investment, and they are not investing in coal, and that's the signal we wanted in the first place. We do need to drive it up internally for social costs. We already have a $40 per ton for public investment price of carbon, which is awesome because that allows the highway not to be socially viable as the subway system that now runs with solar energy. So the thing is, that's true. We're actually the metro, our subway, is actually, the contracts that we have signed have allowed hundreds of megawatts of solar PV investments too. So, I think it's all relative if it's high or low. It's the market signal. It will have to be higher, definitely. Germany doesn't have, but France has like $80 or $90 per ton. I think it's all, as long as you reduce emissions, we shouldn't really hold on to having specific numbers on the carbon tax.
All right, well, I'd like to thank my good friend Marcelo again. Thank you.